Well, thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to see everybody. Actually, I can't really see you terribly clearly because the lights are shining heavily in my eyes, but I can see faces, and they're lovely faces. So very nice to be here. Listen, this is a difficult time in the world at the moment. Anybody who saw the news headlines this morning will have seen that India and Pakistan seem to be boiling up for some kind of conflict or another over Kashmir. Maybe it'll be just a matter of a few shots being fired. Maybe it'll be worse. Maybe it'll be much worse. That's the way that things are happening now all over the world. You find that these small-scale battles and conflicts are turning into something worse. But you know, it's part of an entirely different world from the world that I grew up in. When I joined the BBC, which was 50 years ago this month, the world was an utterly different place. The Vietnam War was just starting in a big way. The Cultural Revolution in China was boiling up in the most frightening and disturbing way possible. Most of the leaders of Latin America and most of the leaders of Africa were military dictators of one kind or another, and the exceptions were pretty few and far between. Above all, there was the great division between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its allies. And to somebody, I was 22 in 1966, to somebody of my age, it seemed pretty much of a racing certainty that at some stage there would be all-out thermonuclear war in which I and everybody I knew and loved would be wiped out. That seemed to be not absolutely certain, but it seemed to me seemed to be something that you could put your money on. What's happened in the 50 years since then is that all of these different blocks, these different certainties, have started to collapse, so that the Soviet Union itself collapsed back in 1991 after the Warsaw Pact and Eastern Europe, the allies of Russia in Eastern Europe, had fallen away from it in 1989 and 1990. So over those 2 to 3 years, we saw the most extraordinary changes. Since then, since 2003, I think you can time it back to the American-led invasion of Iraq, America has also been on the decline. And so all the old certainties that we used to have, the United Nations, the European Union, the West, the Eastern Bloc, those have all started to collapse. And so we're getting all these small-time wars that I added it up the other day. I've now, in fact, I think covered 47 wars in my lifetime. Most of those have been in the last, say, 20 years or so, and they're all small-scale things. What's happening in Syria at the moment, what's happening in Libya, what's happening in Iraq. It's all very, very kind of disturbing. We used to say, it always used to be said, that young people were the victims of these things, and old people, people of my age now, and indeed a bit younger than me, were the ones that started the wars, and the young people were the victims of it. That itself is not as much true as it once was. After all, I've spent a lot of time since 2003, since the invasion of Iraq, watching the growth of organizations like ISIS, for instance. Entirely young people. The oldest leader of ISIS is in his late 30s or early 40s, and all of the volunteers are young people. They've been stirred up, they've been encouraged to join ISIS by that sense of a cause that they can belong to, that has taken them away from the dreariness of ordinary life and the boring nature of it and the corrupt nature of so much of our modern world. And they've been given a cause which they can fight for. It doesn't last long. ISIS itself is on the decline, and by the end of this year, I assume that President Obama was probably just about right when he said that he thought that ISIS would lose its real kind of center of operation in Mosul in northern Iraq by the end of this year. Maybe he'll be out by a month or two, but ISIS will be finished as a transnational organization controlling actual physical territory pretty soon now, because times move on. It's not possible to keep these things going for very long. It's a matter of enthusiasm, and the more that governments are able to show that they can control things, the harder it is for the volunteers and the enthusiasts to get in there and get involved. What has all this got to do with us, with you and me? Well, I think the main thing is that we can work out what it is that unites us, that keeps us together. And what that main thing is that keeps us together is a sense of the oneness of humankind. The fact that we are really all one people. We may have grown up under different systems, under different religions, different types of government, different types of political and economic structures. We may come from rich countries, or we may come from poor countries. But the other major lesson of my 50 years as a foreign correspondent has been that internationalism, that sense of oneness, that sense that we do actually belong together, is far stronger now, 50 years on, than it was when I became a foreign correspondent first and when I joined the BBC back in 1966. Nowadays, when I go to China, for instance, I find young people there, particularly young people there, with a real sense of the outside world, a sense that they want to be part of it, a sense that they belong to it. It's very interesting to go to a cafe, for instance, in Beijing or one of the other big cities at a time when one of these vast Chinese Communist Party organizations is on television, and it'll be there in the room because that's what has to happen in China. But none of the young people will be watching what happens. None of them seem to be terribly interested in what happens. They're interested in the wider world. And this is true not only of China, it's true right across the world. And in a way, the volunteers that went to ISIS are a sort of weird kind of mirror image of that kind of internationalism. It's a reaction, a contrary of internationalism. But we, as young people, as old people, as people, which is the most important aspect of it all, just simply need to stick together and to realize our oneness and the importance of that, the fact that we're closer to each other than we are to governments, to structures, to the politics of the thing. It's a humanity thing. It's a matter of how we live our lives and who we regard as our brothers and sisters. And frankly, I may be 150 years older than anybody else in this room, but when I look round, I see you as my brothers, my sisters. So, thank you very much indeed.
John.